Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're tackling a real heavyweight, a foundational piece of political philosophy, really. Jean Jacques Rousseau's The Social Contract.
Absolutely. And specifically, we're digging into book one. That's where he, lays all the groundwork.
Right. It's the architecture for his whole argument about what makes political authority legitimate.
It really is. You can't understand the rest without nailing down book one.
So our mission today, for you listening, is basically to give you the ultimate shortcut. We want to provide a really detailed synthesis of Rousseau's logic here.
Yeah, charting the course he takes, moving humanity from that, let's say, precarious state of nature.
Right. Precarious is a good word for it.
Into something functional, a justifiable civil society.
It's dense stuff, no doubt about it, can be challenging, but we think it's absolutely essential.
Definitely. And hopefully we can make it feel, well, accessible and logical, step by step.
Okay, so where do we start? I mean, you have to start with that opening line. It's probably one of the most famous lines in all of political writing.
You mean, man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains.
Exactly. That's the immediate paradox he throws at you. How did this happen? How did our natural state, freedom, apparently, turn into universal servitude?
It's a massive question.
And the critical part, the part we're really digging into today is, what, if anything, makes those chains legitimate?
Because if they aren't,
then they're just force, right? Just power. And as we're going to see, Rousseau argues that force is, well, inherently unstable. It can't be the foundation.
that phrase really does set the perfect challenge. And you're right, Rousseau isn't just describing governments as they are. He's not doing political science in that sense.
No, he's setting a standard.
Exactly. He wants to establish the fundamental rules for what he calls legitimate and sure administration in politics.
Yeah.
It's a moral standard for the state itself.
And to do that, he has to clear the ground first. He looks at all the old justifications for authority.
Right. He systematically takes them apart. You see it right there in the table of contents for book one.
Yeah. What does he cover?
Well, he starts with the subject of the first book, then looks at the first society as the family. Then he demolishes the right of the strongest, dismantles justifications for slavery.
That's the demolition phase, clearing the rubble.
Precisely. And then he starts building. That's when we get the social compact, the idea of the sovereign, the transformation of the individual into a citizen.
The civil state.
The civil state, exactly. And even practical things, like how property, real estate, fits into this new legitimate order.
It really is a complete blueprint, isn't it? Every step feels necessary to get to the next one.
It does. He's very methodical.
Okay, so let's follow that method. Let's start where he starts, challenging the old ideas. What doesn't give one person the right to command another? He needs to rule things out first.
Right. So he begins by looking for authority in nature itself. Is there a natural hierarchy? A natural basis for rule? And his conclusion is pretty stark. There's really only one candidate for a truly natural society.
And that's the family.
Exactly, the family unit. In Rousseau's view, it's the most ancient society, and crucially the only one that's genuinely natural.
But even then, he puts conditions on it, right? It's not a model for the state.
Not at all. Because the bond, he argues, is driven purely by physical necessity. Think about it.
Yeah.
Children need their parents for survival.
Food, protection, basic care.
Yeah. It's a physical bond, born out of need. But, and this is key, that bond isn't permanent.
So the natural society only lasts as long as that physical need lasts.
Precisely. Once the children mature, once they can look after themselves, that necessity disappears. Rousseau says both sides, parents and children, they return equally to independence.
The natural bond just dissolves.
It does. Now, if the family chooses to stay together after that point...
Like adult children maintaining a relationship with parents.
Yes. Then it stops being natural. It becomes voluntary. It's based on agreement, on convention, not on inherent natural obligation.
Okay. And he uses this point about the family to draw a really sharp contrast with political societies.
He does. It's about motivation. In the family, he says, the father's love is the payment for the care he provides. There's an affection, a natural inclination there.
Okay, so love drives the parental care. What drives the political leader?
That's where it's fundamentally different. For the leader in the state, Rousseau says the motivation isn't love, it's the pleasure of commanding, the joy of being in charge, of having power.
That sounds less noble.
Well, he sees it as often being about selfish ambition, maybe disguised as fatherly care, but fundamentally different.
So because the motivations are totally different, love versus ambition, Basically, you can't just scale up the family model to justify political rule.
That's his argument. Political authority needs its own foundation, one based on agreement, on convention, because nature doesn't provide a permanent model. Hashtag, tag, tag, tag 1.2, the absurdity of the right of the strongest.
Okay, so nature's out as a basis for permanent command. What about just raw power? Might makes right. This was a common justification historically.
Yes, and Rousseau tackles this head-on in Chapter 3. He makes this really quite striking assertion. He says, the strongest is never strong enough to be always the master unless he transforms strength into right and obedience into duty.
Okay, unpack that. What does he mean transform strength into right?
He's saying that brute force, on its own, can make someone obey, but it can never create a moral obligation or a legitimate right to rule.
It's the difference between doing something because you have to and doing it because you believe you should.
Exactly. He uses the example, well, the implied example of a bandit. If a robber points a pistol at you and demands your purse, you hand it over.
Sure, out of prudence, to save your life.
Right. Prudence, necessity, fear. But do you feel duty to giving your money? Do you believe he has a right to it?
Of course not. It's coercion.
Precisely. And Rousseau argues that's all that rule based purely on strength ever is. It's coercion. The moment you yield to force, it's an act of necessity, maybe prudence, but never moral duty.
And the big problem with founding right on strength is
It's completely unstable. Think about it. If strength creates right, what happens the moment that strength relationship changes?
if someone stronger comes along,
Or if the strong man gets sick or loses a battle?
then the right instantly shifts to the new strongest power.
Yes, the supposed duty to obey the previous strong man just vanishes. You now owe obedience to the new force.
That sounds like a recipe for constant conflict and instability.
It's an illogical paradox, as he points out. The phrase right of the strongest becomes meaningless. If force is the right, then the right changes constantly with the force. It's not a stable principle at all.
So you can't derive a stable ought from a fluctuating is.
Beautifully put. Force is a physical power, right? Is a moral concept. You can't generate a moral duty from mere physical might.
So the conclusion here is pretty decisive then.
Absolutely. Obedience, true moral obedience, is only owed to legitimate powers, not to sheer force. This forces us, logically, to look for the source of legitimacy somewhere else.
Not in nature, not in force. So it must be an agreement. Convention.
Exactly. That's the only option left. Hashtag tag 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 1.3 refuting slavery and alienation. Chapter 4.
Okay, so if legitimate authority has to come from agreement, this sets the stage for Rousseau to tackle one of the most controversial agreements of his time. Slavery.
Yes, Chapter 4 is a powerful rejection of slavery.
Since force doesn't create right, the argument must be that people can agree to be slaves. They can alienate their freedom, right? That's the term he uses, alienate, meaning to give away or sell.
Right, and Rousseau's answer to whether you can legitimately alienate your liberty is a resounding absolute no.
This feels incredibly radical for the 18th century.
It was. He argues that to renounce your liberty is to renounce your very quality as a human being. It means giving up your moral agency, your will, your duties, your rights, everything that makes you human.
There's nothing left.
Nothing. He says such an act is incompatible with the nature of man. It's fundamentally irrational.
So any agreement where someone sells themselves into absolute slavery is just invalid.
Null and illegitimate is how he puts it. He asks, what's the exchange? What does the person gain by giving up everything? The master gets absolute power, sure. But the slave? Maybe bare precarious subsistence, but they've given up their moral core. There's no valid exchange, no real contract possible. It's absurd.
Okay, but what about the argument? The one Grotius and others made, linking slavery to war. The idea that a victor has the right to kill the vanquished.
And therefore, the loser can buy their life by agreeing to servitude. Yes, Rousseau knew that argument well.
And he demolishes it. How?
He does it by fundamentally redefining what war is. This is crucial. For Rousseau, war is not a relationship between individual people.
Not man against man.
No, war is a relation between states, between political bodies. Individuals are only enemies accidentally, he says, as soldiers, as instruments or defenders of their state, never just as men or as citizens outside that context.
Ah, so the conflict is political, institutional, not personal at the fundamental level.
Exactly, and this has huge implications for prisoners of war. Once an enemy soldier lays down their arms and surrenders, what happens?
Well, they stop being a soldier, an instrument of the enemy state's will.
Precisely. They cease to be an active threat. They become just men again. And at that point, Rousseau argues, the basis for the right of war, the right to kill them, disappears entirely.
So the victor doesn't actually have the right to kill a surrendered enemy.
No. Killing is only justified, if at all, against someone who is actively bearing arms against you. Once they surrender, that justification is gone. Therefore, the conqueror cannot claim a right to take a life they never had the absolute right to take in the first place.
Which means the whole trade life for servitude is based on a false premise.
Completely false. And even if, for the sake of argument, the victor did have that right, Rousseau adds another layer. Saving someone's life in exchange for their total servitude isn't a real agreement,
We're not.
because it's based on continued violence, or the threat of it. The enslaved person owes obedience only because the master holds the power of life and death. It's a state of perpetual war, just continued by other means. There's no mutual obligation, no moral foundation. It's still just force.
So the right of conquest is basically meaningless as a justification for slavery.
Utterly meaningless. It's
Aha.
just might pretending to be right again. So the key takeaway from this whole first part, this demolition phase, is crystal clear.
Yeah, what's the bottom line?
Any agreement, any convention that establishes absolute authority for one side and total obedience for the other, whether it's individual alienation or the result of conquest, is inherently void. It's absurd, contradictory to human nature, and ultimately based on illegitimate force.
Okay, so nature doesn't work, force doesn't work, unequal agreements don't work, we're running out of options.
Which leads us directly to the only remaining possibility. If people are to unite legitimately, they must, as Rousseau says in Chapter 5, always go back to a first agreement, a genuine convention.
The social compact. This feels like the heart of Book 1.
It absolutely is.
Huh.
Chapters 5, 6, and 7 lay out the constructive part of his argument. Why do we need this compact?
Well, presumably because staying in the state of nature stops working.
Exactly. He argues that eventually individuals just aren't strong enough on their own. The obstacles they face in the state of nature, think harsh climates, competition for scarce resources, maybe even threats from others who have banded together.
The challenges start to outweigh what any single person can handle.
Right. At that point, humanity reaches a critical juncture. Men must find a way to combine their forces, to act in concert, or they will perish. The old way of isolated independence is no longer sustainable.
But combining forces means giving up some of that independence, doesn't it? That seems like the fundamental trade-off.
It is, and that leads directly to what Rousseau calls the fundamental problem that the social contract needs to solve. How do you state it?
Let me see if I remember the phrasing. It's something like, find a form of association that will defend and protect the person and goods of every associate with the whole common force.
Yes.
And yet each person, while uniting with all the others, still obeys only themselves.
And remains as free as before.
Right, remains as free as before. That's the kicker. How on earth do you achieve that? Unite with everyone, but only obey yourself.
It sounds impossible, doesn't it? A paradox. And the solution he proposes is, well, highly counterintuitive. It often shocks people the first time they read it. Hashtag 2.1, the specific terms of total alienation.
Okay, lay it on us. What's the solution? Because this is where it gets really, really interesting, and maybe a bit scary for modern ears.
The solution, the core clause of the social contract, is this: the total alienation of each associate, together with all their rights to the whole community.
Whoa, hang on. Total alienation of all rights to the whole community.
Yep.
That sounds terrifying. Didn't we just spend time arguing against alienation when we talked about slavery? How is giving up everything to the community any different from giving yourself up to a despot? Isn't that just creating a collective tyranny?
That's the immediate reaction, and it's completely understandable. It sounds like the very thing he condemned. But Rousseau anticipates this objection. He argues that this total alienation is not only necessary, but is, paradoxically, the only way to preserve genuine freedom and security for everyone.
Okay, you need to walk us through the logic here very carefully. How does total surrender lead to freedom?
Okay, there are basically three crucial parts to his reasoning that make this work, that transform it from potential tyranny into the foundation of liberty.
All right, what's the first one?
First, the condition must be equal for all, because each person gives themselves completely without holding anything back. The situation is identical for everyone. No one retains any special rights or privileges over anyone else.
Okay, so absolute equality in the surrender. Why does that matter?
Because if the condition is equal for everyone, then no one has any interest in making that condition burdensome or unfair to others. Why? because they would immediately be making it burdensome for themselves, too.
Ah, self-interest enforces fairness, in a way. If we're all in the same boat, equally vulnerable under the rules, we'll want fair rules.
Exactly. Equality prevents factions or individuals from trying to create loopholes or advantages for themselves. That's the first key.
Okay, what's the second factor?
Second, and this is absolutely critical, you are alienating your rights to the whole community, not to any specific individual or group. You're giving yourself to everybody.
And the implication of giving to everybody is?
But you give yourself to nobody in particular. You don't become the subject or slave of any single master. You're subject only to the collective, of which you yourself are an equal part.
Okay, I see the distinction. Not to a king, not to an aristocracy, but to the abstract entity of the community.
Right. And this leads directly to the third factor, the nature of the exchange. What you gain is actually more valuable than what you lose.
How so? What do I lose and what do I gain?
You lose your natural liberty, that unlimited but highly unstable and insecure right to grab anything you can. You also lose mere possession of things, which is only based on your own strength.
And in return?
In return, you gain civil liberty, which is limited by the general will, but is stable and secure. You gain legitimate property rights, guaranteed by the entire community. And crucially, you gain the equivalent of the power you surrendered, because now you have a claim on the strength and rights of every other member of the community, all directed towards the common good. Plus, you get the collective force backing you up.
So I give up my weak individual power and uncertain rights, and I get back legally guaranteed rights and the collective power of the whole community for protection.
Precisely. You gain more effective force and more secure rights than you had before. It's a net positive exchange, rationally speaking.
And this act of everyone alienating themselves together creates?
It immediately creates a new entity, a moral and collective body, as he calls it. This is the republic, or the body politic. And this body has a will of its own, the general will.
Right, we need to pause here. This concept of the general will is super important and often misunderstood. It's not just what everyone happens to want, right?
No, absolutely not. Rousseau makes a crucial distinction between the will of all, volonté de tous, and the general will, volonté générale.
Okay, what's the difference?
The will of all is simply the sum total of everyone's private, particular interests. It's what you get if everyone votes based purely on their own selfish desires or factional interests. It looks only at private advantage.
Like adding up all the individual shopping lists?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
The general will, however, is different. It aims only at the common good, the shared interests of the entire community. Rousseau thinks of it as what remains when you cancel out the conflicting, self-serving pluses and minuses from the will of all.
So it's the objective shared interest.
Yes. And for Rousseau, this general will is, by definition, always right and always tends toward the public advantage. It can't be wrong about the common good because it is the common good, conceptually speaking. The sovereign, this body politic we just created, expresses itself only through this general will.
Okay, that distinction is huge. It means the total alienation isn't to some random mob majority, but to a collective entity theoretically focused solely on our shared rational common interests.
That's the core idea. And this new body politic, this sovereign, has different names depending on how you look at it.
How so?
Collectively, all the members together are called the people. When they are actively participating in the sovereign authority making laws, for instance, they are called citizens.
Okay.
But when they're under the laws of the state, obeying the general will they helped create, they are called subjects.
So every individual is simultaneously a citizen, lawmaker, and a subject, a law-obeyer.
Yes, it's a dual role inherent in the compact. You're part of the authority and you're under the authority. Hashtag tag 2.2, the sovereign and mutual commitment.
Okay, let's dig into this sovereign entity a bit more. Chapter 7 focuses on it. When I join the compact, I make this two-way commitment you mentioned.
That's right. It's a reciprocal engagement.
As an individual member of the sovereign body, I'm committed to the other individuals in that body.
Yes.
And as an individual member of the state, meaning just as a person living within this new structure, I'm committed to the sovereign, to the collective whole.
Exactly. That dual commitment binds everyone. But Rousseau draws a really important conclusion from the nature of the sovereign itself.
Which is?
Because the sovereign is literally made up of all the individuals who constitute it, he argues it's impossible for the sovereign, as a body, to have an interest that is fundamentally contrary to the interests of its individual members.
Why impossible?
Because to harm the members would be to harm itself. The body can't logically want to injure its own parts. Therefore, the sovereign doesn't need any external guarantee towards its subjects. Its own nature ensures it will act for the common good.
So the sovereign can't rationally betray the people who make it up.
That's the idea. And following from that, the sovereign cannot impose any fundamental law upon itself that it cannot break. It can't bind its own hands in a way that would contradict the very purpose for which it was formed, the common good. The collective always retains the ultimate authority.
Okay, this is a very optimistic, maybe idealistic view of this collective entity. It relies heavily on the idea that the general will is discoverable and will prevail.
It is idealistic, but it's the logical foundation he builds. The sovereign, when acting as the sovereign, expressing the general will, is inherently legitimate and trustworthy within his framework.
But what about the flip side? What happens when individuals acting as individuals don't want to follow the general will? The free rider problem. I want the benefits of society, security, roads, property rights, but maybe I don't want to pay my share of taxes or do military service if needed.
Yes. This is where Rousseau introduces the enforcement mechanism. It's probably the most controversial phrase in the entire book.
I think I know what's coming.
For the social compact not to be an empty formula, he says, it must contain a provision that gives it teeth, and that is, whoever refuses to obey the general will shall be compelled to do so by the whole body.
Compelled by the whole body.
Which means nothing less than that he will be forced to be free.
Forced to be free. There it is. That just sounds like a flat-out contradiction. How can you be forced into freedom? Isn't that just tyranny dressing itself up in fancy philosophical language? How is this different from the might makes right coercion he already rejected?
It's a fair question, and it requires understanding exactly what Rousseau means by freedom here. It's different because the force being applied is, in a sense, internal to the agreement the person already made, not an external imposition. And it's directed towards what Rousseau considers the individual's own higher rational interest.
Explain that more. How is it internal?
Remember, by entering the social compact, the individual agreed that the general will represents their true rational interest, the common good that enables their secure civil liberty. That was the deal they made to escape the precariousness of nature. So if that same individual later acts purely on selfish impulse, on their private appetite, which belongs to the will of all, not the general will, they're essentially breaking the contract. They're trying to enjoy the benefits of the civil state without fulfilling the duties. They're acting against their own rational, agreed-upon best interest.
So the community forcing them to obey the general will is like forcing them to stick to the rational choice they already made, forcing them to live up to their own higher self as embodied in the law.
That's exactly the idea. The body politic is compelling the individual to adhere to the rules that they, as a citizen, participated in creating for the sake of everyone's freedom, including their own. It's forcing them to be the rational, moral being they agreed to become, rather than slipping back into being ruled by mere impulse.
So it's not arbitrary coercion by a ruler, but the enforcement of the mutually agreed upon rules necessary for civil freedom to exist at all.
Right. It's upholding the conditions under which alone true, stable, moral freedom, freedom under self-prescribed law, is possible. Without this enforcement, the compact would dissolve. If anyone could just ignore the general will whenever it suited them, the mutual guarantees would collapse and everyone would be worse off, likely slipping back towards the state of nature.
Okay, I see the logic now. It's still a challenging phrase, forced to be free, but the argument is that the chains of the law are legitimate because they represent self-imposed limits, chosen rationally for a higher, more secure form of collective freedom.
Precisely. The force guarantees the liberty it seems to contradict.
All right, so the compact isn't just a legal arrangement. Rousseau argues it fundamentally changes the people who enter into it. It's a moral and psychological transformation. Chapter 8 dives into this, right? This feels really crucial.
It's hugely important. He paints a very stark contrast between the person in the state of nature and the person in the civil state.
How does he describe the person in the state of nature?
Governed entirely by physical impulse and appetite. Instinct rules. If they desire something and have the strength to get it, they take it. Their liberty is natural liberty, basically, an unlimited right to anything they can physically acquire and hold on to.
But limited only by their own individual strength.
Exactly. There's no morality, just power and desire.
Okay, so that's the starting point. What happens the moment someone enters the civil state through the compact?
The whole dynamic flips. He says man substitutes justice for instinct in his conduct. His actions take on a moral quality they previously lacked.
Morality enters the picture.
Yes, he's no longer guided just by appetite, but by duty, reason, law, the general will.
And Rousseau sees this as a massive improvement, right? An elevation.
Absolutely. He uses quite grand language. He says this transition develops man's faculties, enlarges his ideas, ennobles his feelings, elevates his entire soul.
Wow, so it's not just a political change, it's a psychological and moral evolution.
He literally says man changes from being a stupid and limited animal into an intelligent being and a man. It's the birth of moral agency.
That's a profound claim. So let's break down the exchange again, specifically in terms of liberty and possession, as discussed in this chapter.
Okay. He loses two things, primarily. First, his natural liberty, that unlimited but insecure right to everything. Second, he loses mere possession, which, as we said, was based only on his own force or being the first occupier.
And what does he gain?
He gains civil liberty. This is different from natural liberty because it is limited
Limited by what?
by the general will, by the laws that the community sets for the common good. But this liberty is secure, stable, and protected by the whole community.
Okay, so limited but secure liberty instead of unlimited but insecure liberty. What else?
He gains property. And this is a crucial distinction from mere possession.
Right, we touched on this. Possession is just holding on to something by force. What makes property different?
Property is possession made legitimate. It's based on a positive title, a legal right, recognized and guaranteed by the entire political community. It transforms might into right regarding ownership.
So my claim to my land, for example, isn't just based on me standing there with a weapon, but on a legal framework backed by the collective power of the state.
Exactly. That's the huge gain in security. My property is protected by everyone, not just by me.
Okay, so civil liberty and property. And Rousseau argues there's one more, even higher gain from this transformation.
Yes, arguably the most important gain. Moral liberty.
Moral liberty, what is that exactly?
This is what truly makes man the master of himself, Rousseau argues. Natural liberty was just being driven by appetite, being a slave to your impulses, in a way.
Okay.
Moral liberty, however, is obedience to the law which we prescribe to ourselves.
Yeah.
Because in the civil state, as a citizen, you participate in making the laws, the general will, that as a subject, you then obey.
Ah, so it's freedom through self-legislation, even if it's collective self-legislation.
Precisely. It's autonomy in the moral sense. You're not just reacting. You're acting according to rules you rationally consented to for the common good. This capacity for moral action, for living according to self-imposed rational law, is what elevates humanity. It's a far superior form of existence than the purely instinctual state of nature.
Okay, so the state is formed, individuals are morally transformed, they have civil liberty and the potential for moral liberty. Now, Rousseau gets practical in chapter 9. He has to address stuff, land, real estate.
How does ownership of things, especially land, work now? How does it transition from that chaotic natural state?
Right, this is where the abstract principles hit the ground, literally. How does the community deal with the land its members occupy?
Does it just recognize whatever people happen to grab in the state of nature?
Not quite. It goes back to that principle of total alienation. Remember, when individuals join the compact, they alienate everything, including their possessions, their land, their forces, to the community.
Okay, so technically, the community, the sovereign, becomes the ultimate owner of all the land.
Yeah.
Yes. The state becomes the master of all its members' goods by virtue of the social contract. But this doesn't usually mean the state kicks everyone off their land or nationalizes everything in practice.
So what does that mean?
It means the state takes that prior, potentially insecure possession the individual had, and it legitimizes it. It transforms that possession into true legal property by giving it the backing of the law and the collective force.
It's like the state launders the title, turning a shaky claim into a solid one.
That's a good way to put it. The individual's right to their plot of land becomes more secure, more guaranteed, precisely because it's now held under the ultimate authority of the state.
So my ownership is actually stronger because the state has the ultimate claim.
Exactly. It also establishes a clear hierarchy. The individual's right to their particular piece of land is always secondary, always subordinate to the community's right over all the land within its territory. The common good, expressed through the sovereign, ultimately takes precedence.
This seems important for things like taxation or eminent domain later on, though he doesn't detail that here.
It lays the foundation for it, yes. The community's right is paramount. Rousseau even notes a historical shift. Early kings were often just chiefs of tribes, masters of men. Later, they became masters of territory, which gave them a more secure hold over the inhabitants through their control of the land. This state control over territory is key to its sovereignty.
Okay, so the state legitimizes existing possession into property. But does that mean any claim to land based on first occupancy becomes valid? If I just walked across a huge empty continent in the state of nature, does the new civil state have to recognize my claim to all of it?
No, absolutely not. Rousseau is very critical of unlimited acquisition. Consistent with his emphasis on equality and subsistence, he lays down very specific, strict conditions for the right of the first occupier to be considered legitimate, even within the civil state.
Ah, okay. So there are rules for claiming previously unowned land. What are they? There are three, right?
Yes, three conditions. First, the land must actually be uninhabited when you occupy it. There can't be anyone else already living there.
So no justification for displacing existing populations.
Correct. It rules out conquest as a basis for legitimate first ownership. Second condition.
The occupier must take only the amount of land they need for their subsistence, just enough to support themselves and their family.
Exactly. This directly counters greed and prevents individuals from hoarding vast tracts of land they don't actually need, thereby depriving others. It's about necessity, not limitless accumulation.
Okay, uninhabited, only take what you need, and the third condition sounds quite practical.
It is. Third, you must take possession not just by planting a flag or making a declaration, but by labor and cultivation, actually working the land.
Why is working the land so important?
Because, Rousseau argues, that's the only external sign of appropriation that others can and should respect in the absence of a formal legal title, which comes later from the state. It shows genuine investment in use, not just a symbolic claim.
So you can't just walk around a million acres, put up a fence, and call it yours. You have to actually cultivate it.
Right. And he uses this point to ridicule the claims made by some European explorers and powers during the age of colonization.
Like Balboa, you mentioned, claiming the entire Pacific Ocean, or someone claiming a whole continent just by stepping ashore.
Exactly those kinds of acts. He finds it absurd. How can one man claim territory sufficient for an entire people just by performing some symbolic act? He sees these vast, unworked claims as usurpations based on might, not on the legitimate right derived from necessity and labor.
So the civil state's role isn't just to confirm property, but also to limit it according to these principles of justice and need, curbing the acquisitive appetite that ran wild in the state of nature.
Precisely. Legitimate property, under the social contract, is necessarily limited property, ultimately subordinate to the common good managed by the sovereign. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Okay, so that brings us pretty much to the end of book one. It feels like quite a journey. Rousseau has systematically torn down all the foundations he sees as illegitimate.
Force, the right of the strongest, slavery based on conquest or alienation.
An unstable possession based on might. He clears all that away.
And then he builds up his alternative structure, step by logical step, on one single foundation.
That first agreement, the social compact, based on total reciprocal alienation to the community.
Leading to this new entity, the sovereign, guided by the general will, and resulting in a transformation of the individual and the creation of legitimate property.
So if we had to distill the ultimate lesson from book one for you, the listener, what would it be?
I think it's this. The chains of civil society, the laws and obligations, are legitimate only because they are self-imposed through the compact. And the freedom you gain in this civil state isn't the absence of limits that was the chaotic, insecure freedom of nature.
Right. True. Civil freedom is freedom within limits.
Limits established by justice, by reason, by the general will laws you helped create. In exchange for the precariousness of natural impulse and possession, you gain something far superior.
Which is?
Moral liberty, becoming master of yourself by obeying laws you prescribed, and secure, legitimate property, backed by the entire community. You trade instinct for intelligence, appetite for morality. You become truly human, in his view.
It's a powerful argument for why organized society, when founded correctly, is not just necessary, but morally superior to the state of nature.
Definitely. But, and there's always a but with Rousseau, it seems. This sets up the tension for the rest of the book.
How so? What's the final provocative thought here?
Well, we just laid out this ideal foundation, the pure social compact, creating the sovereign and the general will. It sounds almost perfect in theory.
Yeah, it does.
However, Rousseau is acutely aware, and he hints at this throughout the social contract, that this perfect foundation is almost immediately vulnerable. It's often corrupted by the next step, the actual business of governing.
You mean the day-to-day running of the state, making specific laws, executing them, having officials.
Exactly. The government, which is distinct from the sovereign, is necessary to apply the general will. But Rousseau sees government as having an inherent tendency to degenerate, to usurp the sovereign's power, to prioritize its own particular will over the general will. Things like elections, representation mechanisms we take for granted he sees as potentially problematic, as introducing distance and potential corruption between the people and the sovereign will.
So even if you forge the chains legitimately through the compact, keeping them legitimate in practice through the machinery of government is the real ongoing challenge.
That's the deep tension. If the pure compact provides morality, liberty, and property, does the sheer act of governing always carry within it the seeds of decay? Does the necessary delegation of power inevitably threaten to lead back towards the very forms of illegitimate force and despotism that the compact was designed to escape? What's the price of maintaining legitimacy once the state is up and running? That's the question that echoes through the rest of his work, and maybe through political life itself.
A perfect place to leave it for today. Thank you for diving deep with us into Book One of Rousseau's Social Contract.
My pleasure. It's foundational stuff.